This is CNN Breaking News.
Good morning. So grateful to have your company. I'm Christy Paul.
I'm Victor Blackwell. Welcome to our viewers here in the U.S. and around the world. The breaking news, no travel ban for now. Overnight, an appeals court denied the Justice Department's request to immediately restore President Trump's travel ban.
Instead, the court wants both sides, the Washington attorneys general and the Trump administration, to file legal briefs before they make any further decisions on this.
Also new in just the last hour, the government, as we know, is arguing that the ban should be replaced, or should be in place, I should say. They are saying that it is in the national interest, their phrase of the country, to allow Iraqi special immigrant visa holders to travel here into the U.S. Those particular visas are issued to Iraqis who worked with the U.S. government and military as translators or interpreters. When the order was first signed, there were a lot of questions why there was no exception put into place for those special visas, roughly 50 of those given out per year, even as they argue that nationals of those 7 countries listed should not come to the U.S. There will be exceptions made for those special immigrant visas. Let's get right now to CNN Justice reporter Laura Jarrett to explain what happened overnight. Laura, good morning to you.
Good morning. Well, it was a busy night. So it started with the Justice Department filing an emergency motion in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals just after midnight. And what they were asking for was essentially to press pause on the Seattle judge's decision that had temporarily halted enforcement of the key provisions of the travel ban. But just 3 hours later, so this was overnight, the Ninth Circuit said no to the federal government. The Federal Court of Appeals denied the Justice Department's emergency request, and in a very short order early this morning, instead, as you said, they asked both sides to file legal briefs so that they could hear more about the issues before they make a final decision on the emergency motion. Now, what this means practically speaking is that the ruling by the federal judge in Seattle, that sweeping one by Judge James Robart suspending the ban, that remains in place for now.
Now, absolutely. What's the timeline here? There are specific times that are given in this order, right?
That's right. And so the next step that we will see is the state attorney general will get a chance to respond to the government, and they will file a brief later tonight at 11:59. Then we will see the U.S. Justice Department get another bite at the apple. They get a chance to file a reply brief by 3 p.m. on Monday. Then what we're likely to see is a hearing by the Ninth Circuit.
All righty. Laura, stay with us here. We also want to bring in Laura Coates, a CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor, and constitutional attorney Paige Pate with us as well. Thank you all for being here. Paige, I want to start with you. When we were talking, she was talking about that timeline. Overall, there are a lot of people in other countries watching this and trying to figure out if their visas are going to be valid for the long haul. How long do you believe it's going to take to work all of this out? Is it going to go all the way to the Supreme Court?
Well, that's certainly possible. But at this stage, the Ninth Circuit has asked for additional argument, additional briefing on the merits of the case. And I think that is incredibly important. I mean, we've had several federal district judges decide to stop the enforcement of the travel ban, at least temporarily, but no one has really addressed the merits of the case. No one has really looked in to the constitutional arguments and made a decision one way or the other. So if you really want to do that, if you want to brief it, hold oral argument, that's going to take at least a week, could take much longer if the judges go back and forth on it.
Laura Coates, the Department of Justice in their appeal is arguing that, look, there is classified information here that makes this country unsafe, and that's part of why we are gunning for this travel ban, so to speak, and we want to put these limits on it. How do you argue that? What do you say when you're talking about classified information that nobody else is privy to?
Well, you could do kind of an in-camera, which means the court would look at what they're talking about and not have it public. But the reason they brought that information up, Christy, is because the president has a great deal of deference when it comes to issues of national security. And although the courts will always balance the constitutionality of a particular law, they will have to balance that against the presidential power to determine who has entry into our country. And so what they're doing essentially is saying, listen, in my back pocket, I've got the golden ticket. And that golden ticket is my presidential prerogative to try to determine national security in this country. And so what you're going to see is a preview of what is to come in the Supreme Court. The The brief that they filed largely mirrors what they're talking about in the Massachusetts order, saying, listen, this is going to be an issue of national security. It's an issue about whether the people who are arguing they have a chance or a leg to stand on in court actually do have that, and whether people have a right to come into our country. This is the core of our constitutional bedrock.
The president has tweeted, based on my count, in the last 22 hours, no less than 10 times since this controversy has started. And he's taken some shots at the judge in Washington, of course. And we've had some response to that. Senator Patrick Leahy said this. He said he seems intent on precipitating a constitutional crisis, and now he's attempting to bully and disparage yet another federal judge. What do you make of the tweets and the openness that the president, Page, speaks so freely about in terms of his criticism? And criticizing a decision is one thing, but to disparage a judge is another.
Right, Christy. I don't think we've ever seen anything like this, where the president is singling out and calling a federal district court judge who has a lifetime appointment, who was appointed by another president, a Republican president, confirmed by the Senate, and then calling him a so-called judge. We've not seen personal attacks like that from any other executive, I think, in the history of the country, unless you want to look all the way back until, we're going back almost pre-Civil War days. So I think it's very unusual. I don't think it's helpful to the legal arguments, the constitutionality of this order, but I kind of understand the White House's position, because they're looking at one federal district judge out of many hundred federal district judges who have decided to stop this executive order, which was such a priority with this administration. So they're clearly upset, but I think they ought to focus on the legal arguments and not the personal attacks.
All right, Laura Jarrett, we were just talking, Victor was just talking about the U.S. Embassy official in Baghdad saying that they will now, quote, in the national interest of the country, allow Iraqi special immigrant visa holders to travel into the U.S. Do you anticipate that when all of this is said and done, there may be some modifications to the travel ban as it stands now?
Well, we've already started to see that, right? I mean, think about what has happened even over the last week since the president signed that executive order. We started out not really knowing where green card holders stood, and they were going to have to get a special waiver. Then the White House walked that back earlier this week and said, no, the travel ban doesn't apply to green card holders. Now we've seen what happens with people who hold certain visas. And so I think it's too early to tell exactly what the final version of this order is ultimately going to look like.
A lot of people have been weighing in on this, including law professor Alan Dershowitz. Let's listen to what he had to say yesterday.
Anybody's free to criticize judges. I've criticized judges. I wrote a whole book called Supreme Injustice, criticizing the Supreme Court for Bush versus Gore. It's the nature of the criticism. President Trump used words that seem very injudicious, very likely to alienate some of the appellate judges who might sit on this. But these judges will decide the case on their merits, and it's a closely divided case that reasonable people can disagree about. I think in the end, the stay will be at least partly lifted because parts of the executive order are constitutional.
Laura Coates, do you agree?
I think that's right, that some parts will be lifted. And of course, you're right. The President of the United States has his prerogative to speak on other branches. But remember, we've got three equal parts of the government. And the judiciary must remain independent and not be the marionette, even when it's unpopular with the President of the United States. Interestingly enough, you're coming from a week where you have a Supreme Court nominee who has said just that, who his career has been about making sure people acknowledge separation of powers and that the judiciary remain a powerful entity within the democracy of the United States. But keep in mind here, not every part of the order was struck down or halted by the Seattle judge. Only the parts that have kind of the leanings in terms of the violation of the Establishment Clause and other entities. So you don't have a sweeping ban. You have one that points to what may be a constitutional battle before the Supreme Court as the parts that have been halted.
So, Paige, real quickly, for people who are sitting in other countries with valid visas, trying to determine, do I try to get to the U.S. or don't I at this point, how would you advise them?
Well, based on the actions that the administration has taken so far, Customs Border Patrol seems intent on allowing those individuals to come into the United States. So I think if you have legal status, obviously if you're a citizen, if you're a legal permanent resident, or you hold a valid visa. I think the only consistent thing about all of this is that all of the judges who have looked at this particular thing, and even the administration, is allowing those individuals to come into the country. But if you do not have legal status, it's a totally different situation, and I would not encourage anybody to get on a plane and head this way.
Okay, good to know. Laura Coates, Paige Pate, Laura Jarrett, appreciate your voices in all of this. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk